Hi, everyone, and welcome to Forest for Monarchs, Saving Butterflies, where we explore the journey of monarch butterflies, the forests that sustain them, and the people working to protect these natural wonders. I'm Megan Fulton, and I am thrilled to bring this podcast to life. This is being brought to you by Forest for Monarchs, a nonprofit organization that I am actually the executive director of and have been since 2017. At Forest for Monarchs, we focus on reforesting the monarch butterfly winter habitat and its surrounding area, what we call the buffer zone, and the Highland Lakes watershed region, all in Michoacan, Mexico. This work is something that I'm very passionate about, the reforestation and conservation and overall making the world a healthier, greener place for everyone. So I'm excited to share stories and insights with you all through this podcast about our work, what we do, what's happening in Mexico, and all of the important updates that you need about the monarch butterfly, especially now that they've been proposed to be listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. So with all of that, I think it's good for us just to jump right in and get started. And from here, we will be discussing more about our organization, the history of Forest for Monarchs, and what we do with our founder, José Luis Alvarez. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Forest for Monarchs founder, José Luis Alvarez. José Luis is a dedicated tree nursery man and visionary behind Forest for Monarchs. For over 20 years, he has worked tirelessly to restore forests in the critical areas surrounding the monarch butterfly sanctuaries and the Highland Lakes watershed region. He is the driving force behind the 13.5 million trees Forest for Monarchs has planted. Through his work, he has not only reforested depleted land, but also built strong relationships with local communities, showing them the environmental and economic benefits of reforestation. His expertise and dedication have had and continue to have a profound impact on both land and people in this region. He has been featured in the New York Times, National Geographic, and BBC. We are thrilled to have him here to share his story and insights. Welcome, José Luis.
Hello there. I'm José Luis Alvarez, the owner of the Pine Tree Nursery situated here in the state of Michoacan, Mexico. And I've been doing this. I started tree production 30 years ago, 3 decades, or a little bit more than 3 decades. I think I started 1993. So I've been producing trees for many years. I started working with the nonprofit to reforest the area in the monarch overwintering sites in 1997. So since 1997 to today, 2025, I'm still doing the same thing, producing trees and transporting them, having them planted by the locals in and around the monarch area.
That's wonderful. And for those who are not familiar with Forest for Monarchs, how did it get its start? What inspired you to create this nonprofit?
Well, as I said, I was producing trees since 1993. And originally, what I would do is I would produce trees for men that had sawmills, and by law, they had to replant so many trees when they cut trees. And so those were my main clients, and I was promoting commercial plantations in the area. And for some reason, I was invited to see the monarch overwintering sites by a forestry engineer. And when I saw them, I said, my God, this is, they're in terrible shape. There's these slopes that they've been farming, that were once forest, that they've been farming for so many years. And these slopes are totally eroded. And what they produce on these small pieces of land, it's just the corn's very small, the oats are very small, and really it's useless to farm that type of land. So I came back with the idea of going there someday and trying to convince some people to try to change from farming crops, corn and oats, to planting a forest to restore it to what the land once was. And I forgot about it. And then one day I met Bob Small, and through Bob Small, He got in contact with Lincoln Brower and Ed Ration, and because of them, they started a nonprofit in the United States, and I was able to take the first 20 or 30,000 trees to El Rosario, which is the biggest overwintering site in the world. And I planted those 3 sites with those trees, and that was the beginning of it. From there on, it just took off. Just afterwards, it wasn't 3 sites; it was 20 sites, and then 30 sites, and then 50 sites, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm still doing it. 27 years later, and I'm very excited, and I hope to continue to do it.
Yeah, and when you first started, uh, was it easy or hard? What would you describe it like trying to work with the communities? Was that, forming new relationships, changing land over to forest? How did you get that going?
Well, in the beginning, it was difficult because no one had ever done it.
Mhm.
You see, no one had transformed what were forests at one time that became agricultural pieces of it. Nobody had thought about changing them back into forests.
Mm,
So in the beginning, it was, a little complicated because I had to convince them to stop planting this corn and the oats. But, as time went on, when they saw the results of how well the trees were doing and how they were growing, that it was very easy. I didn't
mhm.
need to convince anyone because they were convinced, and they would line up 1 year ahead of time to ask me for trees for the next season. So actually, once it got going, it was just unstoppable, basically.
Yeah. And at that point, it was really just building more community connections and working with more people.
More people and more connections. The thing is that the government had a program where they have nurseries and they gave trees to these communities, but they would only give communities that would have a large piece of land. In other words, 20 or 30 hectares. I believe it
Okay.
was 30 hectares. But for small plots, which is what I did, they would not give them trees. All right. So anyone that had 2 hectares or 3 hectares, it just wasn't available for them. What
Right.
happened here as time went on is that these individual plots, these small farming plots, they started to become, they were islands in the beginning, but then they became just massive chunks of land it wasn't no longer just one little isolated island. It was now 10, 15 different plots that came together, and this made a condensed forest.
That's amazing. And would you say pretty quickly, or how long would it have taken from when you first started to now for that work to help remove pressure from the monarch habitat?
Well, if this were not have been done, if I hadn't started this, these people that now have commercial forests, okay,
Mhm,
because some of these are commercial, some of these lots will never be cut, but
mhm,
others are commercial forests. In other words, they have a management plan, and
mhm,
when they get to a certain age, they can actually thin their forest. And since these people, and I always try to explain this to everyone, is that these people grew up in the forest, and
mhm,
so they cook with wood, they build houses with wood. If one of their children is sick, they'll go and cut a tree, sell it, and then they go to the doctor and buy medicine. So now that they have alternative plots where they can extract the wood, because we're talking about 26, 27 years now. There's some
mhm.
huge forests now. Okay. They can thin their forest, make money with it, and also they can build with it, cook with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they have an income that would never have been possible if they would to have continued to plant oats and corn. They have this huge investment now. Years later, it's like having money in the bank,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
savings account.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the questions I had is what difference has the organization made in the region, both economically and environmentally? How would you say that impact it has been received
Well,
and what?
there's another part to the story is when I went there originally in 1997, there was a lot of illegal cutting of the trees. Okay, and the community members knew that this was happening. because it wasn't actually the community members, it was people outside of the community.
Mhm.
The community members as well, whatever they needed would go up into the to reserve to the natural forest and cut wood. But
Mhm.
they weren't that interested in conservation at the time. In fact, they had no tree nurseries, and because of this influence that I've had with them, they've started their own nurseries up there,
Mhm.
and they're definitely taking care of the forest because when I started this, they had very little tourism. Okay, now
Mhm.
tourism has become a big money maker for them. Now they they have hundreds of thousands of tourists and they have this income that's coming in. So they know that if they protect their forest, if they have their own nurseries and they stop the illegal cutting, they're going to have revenue from the tourist trade.
Mhm.
So they have not only they have the horses that they rent, not only do they charge you to go up to see them, but they also have stores, and they have stores where they sell things that they make in that area. Also, they have restaurants, and so it's a big money maker. It's more important now, and they've seen it, to
Mhm.
take care of the forest than to cut the forest. So there's more conservation. People are aware, but when I started, this was not the case. You know.
Yeah, it's created a sustainable livelihood for these communities.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
And what about the environmental impacts? So you had described when you first started, the mountains were completely clear cut, really bad shape. In the last about 30 years, what noticeable differences have you been able to see through your work in the region?
Well, there's plantations that I did the first 3 years that are now huge. They're huge trees, and in some areas, of course, there's a beautiful ground cover now because it's so many years of pine needles, right?
Mhm.
The climate has changed totally in each one of these parcels of land, and in some, water has come up again. There were springs that have come up on these eroded pieces of land, 20 years later, and there's a beautiful cover. The climate is totally different. And so it's been good not only for the land, but also for the birds and for the natural plants, and for water in itself.
That's wonderful. And you have expanded, or you've always focused on two different regions, both the Monarch Butterfly Reserve and its buffer zone and the Highland Lakes watershed region. The Monarch area is of course important, we know, because of the monarch butterfly. Can you describe a little bit more of the ecological and environmental importance of the Highland Lakes watershed region?
Well, I'll tell you how this came about. Okay? I started originally with Lincoln Brower, right? And with other scientists that were very interested. Lincoln was on the board, and there were a lot of the most important scientists in the United States and Canada on the board of the nonprofit. And I started with them and I started planting where they thought it was more needed or how it was needed, selective seeding, et cetera, et cetera. But when I started, it was all based on the monarch butterfly, and I was working only there.
Mm.
As time went on, I was able to get some new funding, and part of that new funding was gave me the opportunity to be able to plant in this uh, lake area where I live, where the nurseries. You have two beautiful lakes, and it's Lake Pascuaro, which is very famous, and Lake Sirawan. And this is forest area. This is definite forest area. And basically, here the forest is cut, but it's replanted, right? But there are areas because there's a lot of indigenous communities, okay, that want that at a certain time they cut too much wood, or there was illegal cutting by whoever it may have been, and now they want to restore this. Now the government has its own nurseries, the Mexican government and the state of Michoacan, but they don't have enough for all the communities. So I kind of fill in that space, right? I fill in a space where the government don't have the trees to give. I give these certain communities. So I've worked basically maybe with 40, 50 communities in the area, possibly more. And this has been for years now. So it's the same thing has happened. Okay. They've reforested their lands that were once forests. Okay. And now the forests are very beautiful. And what this does, because there's a big problem here as well with other types of agriculture. Okay, so what's very important with the forest in these mountains and in these lakes is to have a good forest cover, so you'll have a good rainy season, and this rainy season will capture through the root system of these pine trees, these forests will capture water that will go into these lakes and fill these lakes the rest of the year.
That's wonderful. And that's one thing that I think some listeners and followers of Forest for Monarchs might not realize, the connection to the region. Of course, we know the monarchs migrate through the United States and into Canada. And some people might not understand the connection to the Highland Lakes watershed region, but it's important ecologically. There's a lot of migratory birds and animals, but also it's where
Exactly.
much of the produce that U.S. consumers and Canadian consumers eat come from this region. So we actually, as an organization, Forest for Monarchs, do have some key partners within the agricultural industry in the region to help with reforestation. And so we're all really quite connected to this pocket of biodiversity in Mexico that many people might not realize.
Well, the thing is, we're totally connected.
Yeah.
It's the world is totally connected, and I always say this. It to me, it doesn't really matter where you plant the trees. You can plant them here. You can plant them in Brazil, in Indonesia, in Canada, in the United States. It doesn't matter to me. But trees need to be planted, and with this climate change, the only thing that can really help is for us to reforest all over the world, not only in Michoacan or in the butterflies or in the lakes, but everywhere. Trees are the solution.
Yeah. And with that, with trees being the solution, what challenges have you faced in pursuing reforestation, just overall? And how have you
Well,
overcome those challenges?
there's been many challenges. The first challenge is to find the correct seed trees. Okay, because I start from seeds, so I have to find the correct trees. And since there's been a lot of cutting of the forest, usually they cut the biggest trees, and the biggest mother trees that you want is a seed tree. And so those are the first to go. And so that's the first challenge, to find the trees that have the best seed, cut the cones, bring them to the nursery, dry them, shake them. By doing this, I obtain the seeds that I'm going to grow the trees with. So that's the first challenge, I would say.
Okay.
Afterwards, then you have to do your compost. You have to make a compost. You're not going to buy milkweed. I'm not milkweed, but uh, products from Canada, etc. I forgot what they're called. But
Like
you're going to
organic.
use local products. So you have to have a good compost. You have to have your seeds, and then you have to have plenty of water, and you have
Mm,
to have the infrastructure and the people to be able to grow these trees. That's the other challenge. Once the trees are grown, the next challenge is to load them up on the trucks and transport them up as close as you can to the sites that are going to be forest. So
mm,
it's the rainy season. Imagine this. There's no paved roads where we're going. All right. All the roads are just dirt roads. And if it's raining, it's no longer dirt, it's mud.
yeah.
And it's at high elevation. So that's a challenge.
Mhm.
Getting as close to the reforestation site as possible to unload the trees that are going to be planted. All right. After that, what's the next challenge? Well, the trees are planted. All right. And you have to be careful that you have fences or barbed wire in certain areas, because cattle will get in, cattle, and they will damage the trees. So that's another big challenge. All right. So once all this is done, once they're planted and you've got this fenced up, etc., the next challenge is to come back in the dry season and monitor the trees to see how they're doing.
Mhm.
If they had any problems with insects, or if it was cattle, or if it was birds, or humans, or whatever, and you have to find a solution for that. Mostly, it could be worms that start eating the roots of the
Mhm.
trees, and that's very simple to combat, to stop it. And just use some lime around the bottom of the tree or around the tree, That'll get rid of the worms. But the whole thing's a challenge, okay? And as years go by and they grow, then you have bigger challenges, which will be forest fires. Okay,
Mm,
so you have to keep your your area clean. You have to prune your trees, get rid of all the branches, and you have to have fire breaks. And because this is a long-term thing. This is you're going to 15, 20, 25 years. Huh? You
mhm.
can actually extract because the growth rate is very, very fast here in Mexico because we have very good weather. You could
Mhm.
actually start selling part of your wood selectively at year 15. So but still 15 is a lot of years. It's
Yeah.
not a lot of years compared to Canada, Europe, and the United States.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
this is very, very fast. But see, you have to be careful with fire, definitely.
Yeah. And with all of these challenges, because that doesn't sound easy at all, how do you overcome those challenges in the field with, selecting seeds to getting the trees where they need to go and monitored? Um, how do you overcome those challenges?
Well, you overcome with time. You learn how to overcome them. Another problem and something that you have to take into consideration is the communities that you're going to work with, the community that you're going to give the trees to are the communities that are going to plant the trees, right? So you have to be very careful that you find communities that are definitely are interested in this, that have a love for this, for the forest. And
Hmm.
those are the communities that'll do well on the reforestation plots. So you have
Yeah.
to be very careful in that sense to find the correct communities to work with the correct communities.
Yeah. And that's one thing we haven't talked about is that Forest for Monarchs is a community forestry project. We don't pay anyone to plant the trees. It's a volunteer-based planting season, and we donate the trees. So all of these communities receive the trees for free with the expectation that they will plant the trees throughout the summer months, the rainy season. How do you prepare those communities, and can you speak to community forestry a little bit more and how that
Well,
works?
well, first of all, I do speak to them about the planting techniques, the future, what has to be done. But you have to understand something. And again, these people grew up in the forest. Their parents grew up in the forest. Their grandparents grew up in the forest, and they know what a forest is like. They actually know what a tree needs. Okay, so basically, I can give them techniques of how to plant, how to take care of them, but in the end, they know what they're doing. All right.
Yeah. And one of the challenges that we haven't talked about yet is and how this project keeps going. We just said we don't charge the communities for the trees. We're donating all of the trees every year. So
Well,
that
it's an
means
exchange. It's an exchange. We
yes,
give them the trees. Okay, we produce the trees, we transport them, we give them to them, and in exchange, they will plant them because planting is a lot of work. It's not
exactly.
just it's not an easy project when you plant 10,000 or 20,000 trees. That's a lot of work.
They're
Now
donating a lot
they're
of labor.
very organized. Okay,
Mhm.
and everyone in the community helps. The children, the school teachers, everyone in the community goes out and plants the trees because they know it's their future. It's the future of their children and their grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of those challenges though to keep this project going is funding, I would say. Over the years, what would you say to folks who think maybe Force for Monarchs has a lot of money or this big endowment? We don't. We're actually a very small nonprofit. How what would you say to speak to the importance of donations from the public and anyone who's listening?
Well, as I said, you may live in Canada, you may live in the United States, and you may say to yourself, why should I plant trees in Mexico? Or why should I protect the monarch butterflies? Well, just simply think about this, okay? Global warming is has an effect on the whole planet, not just Mexico, not just Canada. It's a global problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you can help plant trees to change global warming, you're doing a good thing. All right. Now, funding is always a problem. We're a very small nonprofit, but even being small, we've been working for 27 years.
Mm-hmm.
So some years we have bigger donations, we produce more trees. Some years we have small donations, we produce a smaller amount of trees. But we're still going, and I think it's if we've gone this far and we've lasted this long, it's because we're doing something good and something that people should be interested in and should make donations to keep this going.
Yes. And with that, I'll go over just one thing quickly, and then we'll get back into the questions. For anyone who's listening, I want to thank you for tuning in to Forest for Monarchs Saving Butterflies, where we are connecting conservation, culture, and collaboration to safeguard the monarch migration and the habitats they call home. If you have been enjoying what you've been hearing and you're curious about the organization and more of what we do, you can learn more about our work at www.forestformonarchs.org. And with that, Jose Luis, this is a lot of work. There's a lot of challenges. So I would say it's a job that while you're working in nature and with butterflies and trees, it's actually quite stressful. So how do you stay motivated in this line of work?
Well, I have a love for the forest. I have a
Mhm.
love for trees, and you could say it's my passion. I don't call it work. I call it more like a hobby or a passion, much better than a hobby. And I love seeing my trees grow. I love seeing the forest become huge because and it's full of birds and it's very rewarding. I say I have one of the greatest jobs in the world.
That's great. And, given sort of the ongoing challenges with climate change and sort of the climate crisis that we're now calling it, um, a lot of folks we hear from will sometimes say, well, is this really making a difference? Or, I'm just one person. What can I really accomplish? What would you say to someone who said that?
I think any person that plants a tree, I'm saying one tree, is doing something to help the planet. Okay. Now, if you take in consideration how many people are on this planet, how many millions? If each person on the planet planted one tree, it would change the planet totally.
Yeah.
Right? So all efforts are good. One tree, if you plant 10 trees, 100,000 trees, you're doing a good thing.
Yeah. And how do you measure the success of forests for monarchs? Both in the
How do
terms,
I
yeah, how do you measure the success of forests for monarchs, both in terms of reforestation and butterfly conservation?
we've had a huge success in both in all areas. We've been successful. That's why I say if a nonprofit has existed for 27 years and has been successful, scientists have seen the work.
Mhm,
The United States government has made donations to the nonprofit, and they've come and seen our work.
mhm.
They've taken notes. They've analyzed how many trees, how much they capture in carbon. It's been successful for 27 years. What more can I say?
That's very true. And you're not just planting trees, you're planting trees that survive with you said you monitor every year the sites that have been planted and reforested, and you're seeing on average a 70 to 80% survival rate with some sites as high as 90% survival. So that's
That's
quite
correct.
yeah.
That's very high.
Yeah.
That's extremely high. But again, there's a lot of things that contribute to this.
Hmm.
All right. We'll start. You have to have a good tree.
Hmm.
You have to have a very hardy tree, a very good root system. Okay.
Hmm.
You have to transport the trees correctly to the sites.
Hmm.
Then you have to plant the trees correctly.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of things that go into this.
Hmm. And would you say it's always a work in progress? We're always learning something new every year.
Well, yes and no. Some things don't change. Okay. You have to have a good tree, and to
Yeah.
grow a good tree, You have to have good substrate. You have to have good seed. You have to have a good watering system. That's not going to change. All right.
Yeah.
What might change is you might have better filters, or you might have better compost. So yes, maybe you could say that we can still learn each year from what we do. But in general, once you have a system that's been working for 27 years, and it's been more than 27 years, I've been producing trees for over 3 decades. Once
Mhm.
you have a system that works, you know all the tricks to the trade. You can always learn. I'll agree with that. But let me put it this way: you're already 80 or 90% ahead of the game when
Yeah.
you've had so much experience. I can say this: I've seen a lot of nonprofits during these 30 years that I've been producing trees that that start tree nurseries, okay, or that start other nonprofits that have to do with the forest or something else, and they don't last. They'll
Mm.
last maybe 2 years, 3 years. The maximum that I've seen them last is 6 years, which 6 years is what a Mexican president lasts, and that's maybe where they got the funding during those 6 years. But I have not seen nonprofits that last 27 years
Mhm.
in this field, okay, in producing pine trees and making forest. I don't know of any other nonprofit in Mexico and probably in other places that has been doing this for 27 years.
Yeah.
So this must be a successful project.
Yes, I agree. And I know I'm biased because I'm the executive director, but I agree that to have a nonprofit last that long, doing one thing and doing one thing well, that's very impressive. And you're not willing to compromise on, the integrity of what you're doing. You know what you're doing and you're gonna stand by that. And with that, it's been 27 years. What are your long-term goals? 5, 10, however long, what do you envision for the future of Forests for Monarchs?
Well, I envision continue doing this until I'm too old or too ill or too fat or whatever it may be to do it. But I have my children that are involved in this. So if I stop, they're going to continue. This is our way of life, and we'll continue doing it.
Amazing. And for those listening who are maybe new to us or are looking for more ways to get involved, what are some ways people can join the cause?
Well, like I said, there's my youngest daughter would receive volunteers. They could come here and stay and work in the nursery, and that's part of it. But basically, you know, you don't have to come and volunteer and work. You can just come and say hello and take a look. You don't have to work. We're not obligating you to work.
Yeah.
And of course, to continue this, we need donations. Basically, donations are what makes this nonprofit work.
Mhm.
And without those, we're nothing. Without the people helping us, we're nothing.
Mhm. I agree. Without everyone out there listening who has made a donation, or even if you're listening, that's helping us spread awareness and grow our reach. We really couldn't do this work without you. We are, in fact, a very small nonprofit, and we appreciate your time listening to this and learning more about our organization. So, I want to thank you for joining us today, Jose Luis. We are so grateful to you for this work, for creating this organization. We're grateful to you, our listeners, and to our donors and funding partners. I know we've said it a lot, but as a small nonprofit, we do rely on your support to continue this work. If you like what you're hearing and you want to help, please visit www.forestformonarchs.org/donate to make a donation today. Every dollar plants one tree, and your contribution will get right to work. We're still raising funds for our 2025 tree count, which hopefully we'll announce around Earth Day. If you're listening to this around then, you might hear sooner rather than later. But until then, I want to thank you all. Thank you, Jose Luis, and we will be back again at some point with another episode for this podcast. Thank you.